Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. Really glad to be with you. We are just coming out of the couple of weeks in which we've had the July 2019 bar exams. We're now in that month of August when it's kind of like the water behind me. It's very quiet and still, not a whole lot going on. There's still certainly some reverberations from what happened in California. There's also been a bit of a pushback on some things that happened in Florida. We'll talk about both of those events in just a moment. And we are now in the waiting period for results. The beginning of September will mark results in a couple of jurisdictions. North Carolina is typically among the first. We've got some other UBE jurisdictions. And then the first large jurisdiction to report results is typically Florida, and that will be mid-September. So if you took the exam in July of 2019, you're in that period of time when you're just sitting around and waiting, and maybe you're wondering to yourself, should I be talking about what happened on the exam or not? And so in today's episode, I'm going to be including a talk that I gave a few years ago. It's one of the most popular ones we've got on our YouTube channel about whether or not you should post-mortem your exam. So I hope you'll stick around for that. I think it's a useful look at the benefits of talking through the exam and why some people probably shouldn't do that. So stay tuned. We're going to get to that in just a minute. If this is your first time on the podcast, we're glad you found us. Welcome. We do these podcasts in both audio and video format. If you'd like to watch the video, you can do that at celebrationbarreview.com/266. That's the episode number. If you prefer to listen to the podcast, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and lots of other places where podcasts are syndicated. Be sure to subscribe if you're listening to the podcast so that you don't miss out on any of the episodes. And we come to you just about every week at this same time to discuss all things bar exam related. Now, we've been doing these podcasts for a few years now, and if you're interested in going back and checking the archives, they're all on our website. You can find them under case studies. You'll see a link to the podcast, so be sure to check that out. Before we get into today's message, I want to let you know that this episode of our podcast is brought to you by our brand new, all new free training webinar. It's called Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. Now, for many years, I've offered this webinar, and it has had literally thousands and thousands of people go through it, and it's been life-changing for folks. We take a look at the 4 steps that you need to follow in order to pass the bar exam, and we use case studies, and you hear from students who are successful in their own words. Well, just recently, I had the opportunity to update the webinar training, and I'm very, very excited about it. We've got all new case studies from the most recent exams. We've got lots of new information. We've got lots of examples, lots of opportunities to give you the information that you need in order to be successful. And based on requests from our audience, we've made it available in an on-demand format, so you can watch the webinar anytime you want, whenever it's most convenient to you. Now, you do need to register to take the webinar, and you can do that by going to the show notes on the audio or video pages of our podcast, or by going to this URL. It's celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. So real easy, celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. Just click to register and then select the date and time that's most convenient for you. I think you're going to find this information is extraordinarily valuable because it literally breaks down the process of how you study into 4 measurable steps that you can follow. And really would love to have you join us for that series and find out how you can do something different, make the next bar exam your last bar exam. All right, well, before I get right to the heart of today's message, talking about should you post-mortem your exam, I do want to update you a little bit on what's been going on, particularly in California and Florida. Now, let me talk about Florida first. If you're not familiar with the Florida bar exam, we talked about it in episode 265, and we pointed out that a couple of the essay questions struck us as being inappropriate. There was a question about pre-notification and approval before you got a tattoo. And it looked to us, as well as many other observers, that the question was a proxy question for an abortion rights question. And it was really a very odd question It really was using all of the language and all of the recognition and rules that would typically go in the abortion rights language that's being debated in legislatures across the country, but they just substituted the word tattoo for abortions, and it was very, very odd. There's been a lot of pushback about that question. A lot of people are writing, calling, texting, saying, hey, I thought it was weird. It felt like an abortion question, but they didn't want to use that word. And it seemed like a very odd subject to be testing in the way they were testing it. We haven't heard from the bar examiners yet. It'll be interesting to see when results come out, what the scores look like for that essay. And I don't know that we will hear from the Florida bar examiners. They're notoriously publicity shy. But I think it was, as I've looked at the question now several times, I think it was inappropriate. I don't think they should have used this language. I don't think it was a very clever way to disguise what they were trying to do. And frankly, the entire area of law that they were trying to talk about is very unsettled. So I thought it was a very strange question. So we'll see if there's anything else that happens there. Another of the 3 Florida essays was also a strange question. It was a criminal law question, which in and of itself is unusual in Florida for an essay, but it was a statutory rape question. And it seemed, again, to be tone deaf, given everything that had been going on up to that point. And as I'm recording today, we've just gotten news about Jeffrey Epstein. And so all of the statutory rape, 15-year-old girls being raped, that's what the question was about. And I thought that that was, again, highly inappropriate. Could have been a trigger question for a lot of applicants. But beyond that, it just is not something that was necessary to be tested in a bar essay. There were lots of crimes they could have tested. There were lots of ways they could have gotten at the information that I think the examiners wanted to know. And they could have done that without a question that I think would add additional stress and strain to people, and one that, again, looked like they were trying to be trendy and current without being exactly current. And I thought, again, it was just an odd question, poorly timed, and really tone deaf to the environment. So way to go, Florida bar examiners. Once again, you've proven that you really don't care what's going on around you. And for the people who took the question, I have gotten a lot of feedback from people who were very upset by that question and felt it was an unfair question. It was an emotional question. And frankly, I think it did trigger some people. So I'm really sorry that that's happened. So we'll see what the results are like in Florida when those come out, but a couple of areas of controversy there. Not too much controversy in other states except California. And of course, California remains the big controversy. If you have not heard up till now, California inadvertently released the essay topics and performance test form 5 days before their exam to 16 law school deans. Then upon realizing that they had done that, they waited 3.5, 4 days to send a very strangely worded email out that said, we've done this and now we're going to give you the subject matter a couple of days before the test. There was a lot of controversy, as you can imagine, about why some people might have had this information. No real word as to whether or not any of those law school deans shared that with anyone else in their law schools. Many of those deans work for, are on the payroll and tightly connected with some bar review companies. No word if they shared that information with those bar review companies. And the entire situation got even weirder when it was revealed that the president of the California Bar Examiners, her son was an applicant for the California Bar in July 2019. And so she had to be firewalled out of the entire process because there was the appearance of a conflict of interest for her. So it's like, could it get any crazier? Well, as it turns out, now that the exam has happened, we've learned that almost 8% of the registrants for California failed to show up for the test. The examiners offered a less than 24-hour window for people to withdraw from the test and get a full refund. That wasn't enough time for a lot of people, and I think that, frankly, the examiner should offer a voucher refund for the cost of the exam to anyone that asked for it from the July 2019 exam, whether they took the test or not. I think we're going to see, again, a very low pass rate, and I suspect that a part of the reason for the low pass rate will be that a number of people were thrown off by what happened on the weekend before, and I think those people are entitled to a refund of their bar examination fees from the examiners. Now, to be clear, the examiners have not offered this or discussed it, but I think it's something that they clearly need to consider and should be doing. One of the other interesting things, and I've gotten a lot of feedback and comment from people in episode 264, 265, we've talked a lot about what was going on in California. But I heard from a lot of people that said that either they were not in a position to get the email late Saturday night. It was actually sent out at 9:30 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday night. And it didn't look like it was an official email. I mean, when you see it, it really looks like it could have been a hoax. And that was the first thought of a number of people, including a number of law school deans. And the reality was that the reality here was that a lot of folks didn't know that this had happened, or they got the email and they just assumed it was a hoax. But there were a fair number of people who were traveling that weekend to get to their sites, didn't see their email. There were people that, frankly, I heard of a couple of people that were out camping just to clear their brains and didn't have their email and didn't know anything about it. I mean, there was a whole variety of things that happened. And it wasn't until much later in the day on Sunday when the examiners finally, I mean, and this is the weird part, they sent out the email 9:30 Saturday night, and it's not until afternoon on Sunday when they finally put on their website, yeah, that's real, it's not a hoax. I mean, what were you doing? Why did it take you, more than 12 hours to do that? And the answer is that I think the examiners thought it was no big deal. I think that their basic view was, well, okay, it happened, and we're going to say we're sorry, and no big deal. But it was a huge deal. And it's absolutely incomprehensible to me that they behaved this way. And so there were people that had at least a head start. Some of them may have had a 3-day head start. Some of them may have had a 1-day head start. Some of them may have had a 5-day head start. We really don't know. And there's no real indication yet as to who got this information and when. I mean, we know the 16 law schools, but we don't know what happened after that. Not a single law school dean has given an affidavit or filed anything or said anything publicly that says, I never distributed this information. I find that really interesting. If I were one of those law school deans and I didn't give that information to anyone in my school, I would have been out front immediately saying, we didn't do that. But I haven't heard anything. Now, if somebody knows of one that's done it, let me know, and we'll give our props to that ethical person. But the reality is that it's very unlikely that if you sent this material to that many people that it did not leak out in some way. And so what the examiners did in trying to fix that or remediate it was to only make the situation worse. And I think that that is something to keep in mind. I've also talked about the fact that I think that this experience probably taints the results from the July exam for both good and bad. I think if you pass the exam, there will be some people that might legitimately say, did you pass because you got an extra or an unfair advantage? That's certainly not fair or right for everyone, but I think there may be some people that did, frankly, and I think it does taint the results for everyone. I think more likely, however, given the fact that we know that only about 1,500 or so people of the 8,000 that took the exam will pass, is that for the vast majority who fail, it will feel like it was an unfair test. And in my mind, when you think about the delay and the cost of waiting and the cost of preparing and the time invested and the family time lost and so on, this is an extraordinary cost to go through. And I think it's a completely unfair result. There were other things the bar examiners could have done. We've talked about that in other episodes. They could have postponed their day of the exam. They could have brought in substitute questions. There are steps that could have been taken. They did none of that. And I think they took the path of least resistance, and they did the easiest thing for them, even though I think it was the least effective by far. Now, I have read some articles in the ensuing weeks since the exam saying, well, what if California had been part of the uniform bar exam? Would that have been better? That was a really bizarre approach to take, because if California had released those results, then you would have impacted 34 states and not just one. So in my mind, there was no advantage there whatsoever. And you might say, well, why did the examiners even bother to release the topics in advance? And the reason for it is so absurd. It was that they needed to let selected group of 16 deans know so that they could come and observe the grading process. Now note that there are 62 law schools in California. There are a number of bar reviews, and not invited, not allowed to see the process. Why these 16? What was going on? The examiners are not providing many answers. Well, because the examiners aren't providing answers, the California Supreme Court has stepped in and they're going to conduct an investigation. I look forward to the results of that. But frankly, an investigation by the California Supreme Court of their own arm, the California Bar, is not exactly what I would think of as an arm's length investigation or inquiry. So I'm skeptical of what we'll see from that result. In fact, there was even another strange tone-deaf moment from the California bar examiners this week. They sent out a survey to members of the California bar asking them what they thought about the bar exam. Really? Are you kidding me? I mean, you're talking to members who are already in the bar about what they think about the bar and the topics and the scoring. They're already in. And they may be one constituency that you want to pay attention to, but I don't think they're the only ones. And in fact, they even offered a continuing legal education credit for filling out a 20-minute survey. I think that is absolutely crazy. And, again, it just sort of speaks to the sense of this was no big deal. And so let's just ask our existing members, did they think it was a big deal? Well, they're already in the bar. They're not the people affected. And the ones that were affected, they're not being surveyed. No one's asking them what they think. So again, I'm really troubled by how California's handling this. I think if they could do something wrong, they've done it wrong up to this point. Everything about this test has gone badly. And if you were caught up in the July 2019 California bar exam, I don't know what to tell you. It's just bad. I've talked to lots and lots of people, students of ours, as well as people in other courses, and I've had no one who said to me, oh, it was fine, it was no big deal. I've not heard that response at all. Every person that I've communicated with, whether it's been a phone call or video chat, an email, a text, they have all indicated that there was some level of disconnect and discomfort and uncertainty and unease, all the way to the people that literally at the last minute dropped out, even though they've been studying for months for the exam because they just didn't feel it was going to be fair. So are there lessons to be learned for the rest of the country? Absolutely. One of them is you don't need to send out a grading sheet with topics in it to anyone. That is not necessary. That is not part of what it takes. The National Conference of Bar Examiners release with their questions after the exam something called the drafter point sheets. That is perfectly sufficient, and that's what California should be doing. I said months ago that California should release drafter point sheets like other jurisdictions. It was part of my recommendations for what California could do to improve their bar exam, and I stand by that. That's a far better solution than inviting a small selection of deans and selected members of their faculty in to watch them grade the exams. That makes no sense at all. All right, well, I suppose there's a lot more that could be said about all this. We'll continue to keep our eye on it. I invite your comments and emails. Let me know what you think. Put your comments on the podcast here or on the page, or email me at jackson@celebrationbarreview.com. We'll continue to keep our eye on what's going on here. We won't get California results, of course, until just before Thanksgiving. So we're going to have a very long wait. And I would say that if you took the exam in July of 2019 in California, if I were you, I'd start studying for February 2020 now. I would just assume that you're not passing. And I know that sounds really harsh because certainly some people will pass. But frankly, we know the statistics are so bad anyway. I think it's even more likely in this case that we'll see a high failure rate on this exam. And I think it's way better to start studying now than to wait. And of course, if you don't have to take the exam in California, get out. I mean, take the exam somewhere else, anywhere else. California is clearly not a hospitable place for bar takers right now. Okay, well, that's what's happening in California and Florida. The rest of the country, pretty quiet, pretty stable, we think. If we hear anything, we'll let you know. And of course, we'll keep you informed as results start to come out. Well, now I do want to jump to our message for today. I guess it's a two-parter. The first part was California and Florida, and now we want to talk about whether or not you should do a deconstruction or a postmortem on your exams. I know that's a big question that a lot of bar takers face at this point in time, and so I want to share this message with you about that particular topic. A few years ago, I did a video series that I called Exam Peace. Two words that didn't really go together because for most folks, exam and peace, yeah, not the thing you typically think of when you think of the exam. It's not peaceful, it's anything but. Well, that series of videos got thousands of views and lots of comments, and I thought it was time to update it just a bit. And so today what I wanted to do was to go back and revisit some of those messages, particularly dealing with what happens right after the bar exam and the desire to talk about your results, to do a post-mortem on them. What got me to thinking in the first place about exam peace was a poster that I got from a student many years ago after their bar exam. The statement on the poster said, "Peace. It does not mean to be in a place where there's no noise, trouble, or hard work. It means to be in the midst of those things and still be calm in your heart." Still be calm in your heart. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Now, I keep this particular poster in my office. It's behind my computer, so you can't see it, but it's a very useful reminder to me that peace never means a lack of trouble, a lack of challenge. And for those of you who have just finished taking your bar exam, certainly you've experienced that. What peace really means, I think, is that in the midst of those difficulties and those challenges, that you remain in a good place. You're calm in your heart, you're calm in your brain, and in your mind as well. And so the first place that I wanted to talk about exam peace might seem like a strange starting point to you, but it's really predicated by where we are in the cycle of the year, and that is, what do you do after bar exam results come out? As I'm recording this, the exams are just now finishing up, and so we're in this period of a week or two after the exam that I would think of as a post-mortem time. That is, when people start replaying the exam in their minds, or they contact me as a mentor and they talk about or write about what went on. And you might be thinking, as I'd be talking about at this point, how to achieve peace as you start your studies, because most of you that are going to be watching or listening to this certainly are in the mode of just beginning your studies for upcoming exams. We will get there, I promise, and you can check out the other videos in the Exam Peace series, and we'll link to those. But I thought today I'd work backwards just a bit and talk about what happens in terms of peace after the exam. Now, there's some things that I think are just routine and obvious, I suppose routine to all of us, and that is that once the test is done, you can't affect the score. I mean, thank you, Captain Obvious. We know that, all of us, intellectually, but I can tell you that emotionally, that seems to not always be the case. There are plenty of people that replay the test over and over again in their mind, and sometimes in their mouths. They just keep talking about it. I have people who will call me right after the exam, some who email me, some who text me, some who post on our Facebook group, and then there are those who do all of that, and they incessantly bore down on anyone around them to talk about the test as though they can't get it out of their system, they can't purge it, and somehow talking about it will reassure them or change the outcome in some way as to what has happened. Obviously, once you've handed in your test sheets or sent your uplinks to ExamSoft and the examiners, there's nothing else that's going to happen. It's all done. And so any kind of postmortem is really not very productive. But why do we do them? And we all tend to do them. And why would I ever encourage people to actually do them? Well, to me, it's a little bit like draining out a wound. You need to bleed it out a little bit. You need to get it out of your system. And so, well, some people might tell you, be tough, just suck it up and move on. I'm going to tell you a little bit the opposite. I think you do have to flush it out. After you've taken the bar exam, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 days, you're hyped up. Some of you will be watching or listening to this message perhaps on your way back from the test site, and you're just ramped up. You're amped up. It's a pinnacle of the work that you've done. It's a combination of the effort you put in. It's certainly a high-stakes test, and there's a lot riding on these results. And it's only natural to want to express what that test was about for you. In fact, I think sometimes it's a danger for people to keep those emotions and those reactions bottled up. Now, if you're one of the people that truly wrote off the exam, you finished on the last day and you said, don't care, done, I'm out of here, and you never think about it again, well, that's awesome. I mean, you're one of the really great and well-balanced human beings. But I would say that most of us probably don't have that reaction. Most people have some mental replay that goes on, some amount of deja vu, some let's go back and see that highlight tape again that they run on their own version of Sports Center from the bar exam. And we tend to think about the exam, some more than others. Now, as I said, there's nothing wrong with thinking about the exam once it's over. That part is good, and kept to moderation, I think it's helpful. But here's where it can get dangerous. There are those people who immediately move from the replay mode into the beat myself up mode about what happened. And the most common way that I see this is a phone conference or a Skype conference or an email or a posting in the Facebook group in which the person says something to the effect of, I missed the following blank, 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 blank issues. What's going to happen? Did I fail the bar exam? Now, if you're any kind of a listener or watcher of my work, or you're in our course, you already know what I'm going to say about this. Issues, the person that says I missed the issues on the essay or the multiple choice, whatever part it was, well, they were right. They did miss issues because there is no end to issues. And if you haven't heard me talk about this, here's the really brief part of it. The word issue is a lazy word. It just means a placeholder for anything that could be in there. And because we can't define what an issue is, the reality is that there's no end to those issues. It's probably the most ambiguous, ridiculous, weasel word in the legal language. It's the word of lazy people. And so when somebody says, I thought that there were some issues in that problem, oh, really? What? I mean, how many were there? Maybe 1 million, maybe 100, maybe 50, I don't know, but more than you could ever write about. There's certainly no end to the issues. So when someone says to me, oh, I think I missed some issues, well, they're correct. I think the better way, however, to put it or to think about it would be, did you miss any of the major disputes or the conflicts? Because if there's a major dispute or conflict in the question, in the fact pattern, and that was something that you missed, it would be significant. But literally, how would you know which issues were important or unimportant? You see, if all you were trying to do is to issue spot after the bar exam, well, that was almost as crazy as trying to issue spot into the bar exam, because in a timed test, there's simply no way for you to hit every single issue. You know, I think the big box bar reviews and their brethren really do students an incredible disservice by saying you should issue spot in the exam, because they know full well that you can't really issue spot, not completely, not fully. You can't even figure out what that means. So you're going to torment yourself afterwards saying, did I miss the blank issue? Well, you probably did. The question really that you should be asking is, does that matter? And most of the time when I dig deeper into these issues that people think that they might have missed, it turns out that they're pretty marginal, pretty peripheral. The core major parts of the problem are pretty obvious to see. That's why they're out there. And if you wrote about those, whether you got them right or wrong, if you wrote about them, you're generally much better off. So when people start tormenting themselves about an extraneous marginal issue, well, that's just masochism. So the answer to the does it matter question probably is best answered by saying, was there a dispute about that part of the problem? So if there was, and you didn't address that at all, yeah, you might be in some trouble on that particular question. But if you didn't address it because it's not really a dispute, it was just something we called an issue, then stop beating yourself up. There's nothing to be gained by that, and you don't need to worry. And I want to emphasize this because a lot of people lose a lot of sleep over things that don't really matter. Now, another part of the postmortem, the beating up, the lack of peace, is really a matter of simple mathematics. Another type of call or conference or email I get, somebody says, well, I think I was doing pretty well, but then I really blew the property essay or the second performance test on the exam, or there were a bunch of mortgages questions on the MBE. News alert, there are not a bunch of mortgages questions. I know that will upset those of you in the Big Box Bar Review, which, by the way, for like 15 years has been telling people there are a lot of mortgage questions. I don't know why. There aren't. But anyway, people go through all of this, and they get really, really wrapped up about a specific question, whether it's on the MBE or a specific essay or whatever it might be. And then they make the illogical jump to assume that that one question has kept them from passing. Now, you may have heard me say you're just one answer away, and I mean that, but when I talk about being one answer away, what I really mean is pushing yourself over the finish line. Now, as you do the postmortem, I don't want you to think, oh my God, that was the one answer that kept me from failing. There is no comfort in that approach. So here's the trick, I think. Take this one question that you're pretty sure you missed, or that series of multi-state questions that you missed, and do the math. Ask yourself, how is your particular state exam scored? What percentage of the overall score goes to the state part of the exam, and what percentage goes to the MBE? And then ask yourself, within this component where you think you had problems, if I missed one of the 6 essay questions, or the 5 essay questions, or the double-counted MPT question in California, if I missed that, How much of the overall score did that one question amount to? And remember that what we're talking about here is that you got a 0 or a 1 or a 2 or a 3, a low score on a 100 scale. Now, assuming you didn't just turn in a completely empty sheet of paper or upload a completely blank file, that you did something, ask yourself, given the worst case scenario, if you didn't get a 0 on it, well, what's your worst case score that you think you could get? Then figure out what that worst case score would be and what it represents as a percentage of the total possible score for that part of the exam. And then ask yourself, what's that total number, or what the number in that essay amounts to for that part of the exam, and expand it even further. In other words, what does this number mean for the overall test? Let me give you an example. If you think that you missed 1 or 2 multiple choice questions on the MBE, maybe there was a rule against perpetuities question, and you're sure that you missed it. Well, that might be worth 1% or maybe 2% of your MBE score. That might be worth 50% of your overall score, which means that 1% now becomes 0.5%. You begin to see how it plays out. If you think that you missed an essay, or you got some part of it, but not as much as you should, you, quote, failed an essay, well, it's probably somewhere on the order of 5 to 10% of your state part of the score. That's probably in most states about what it amounts to. Well, if it's 10% of the state score, and the state score is 50% of the overall, it's 5% of your overall score. So here's the interesting part to me mathematically. If you take the number of people that failed the bar exam by less than 5% of overall points, that's actually a pretty small number, very small in fact. The truth is that mathematically, the part that you missed probably didn't make much of a difference. It's the overall performance that makes a difference. Now, if you say, I blew essay 1, 3, 5, well, then we've got a slightly different problem. But most of the time when people are beating themselves up, it's because there's a specific question on the exam that they think they blew or that they missed. And that's really the point I want to make to you. If across the board you didn't know how to write or do your essays, or you didn't turn in anything on either performance test, or you didn't finish 20 questions on the multi-state, well, that's a different matter altogether. And then you can do the math and see that, in fact, you were in trouble. But I'm talking to the people who only think that they had a specific problem and a limited problem. So if you're doing a postmortem right now, in your own mind, in order to give yourself some peace, do 3 things. 1, remember that the test is actually over. There's nothing you can do about it. That's obvious. Second, think about what it is you're really concerned about. Were you thinking about issues or disputes? That makes a huge difference. Was it detail stuff, or were it things that you had no chance of getting to anyway? And third, do the math. Just sit down and figure out the part that you think, what does that amount to? What does it mean? And in most cases, you're going to see it's probably not a whole lot. I think if you do those things, you're going to find that you've got a little bit more peace as you wait for the results to come. I would also say that we're going to be talking later about what to do while you're waiting for results, but here's a sneak peek. Go on with your life. Go out and do the things that you were doing before you started studying for the bar exam. If you're looking for a job, start that process. If you've got a job, go back to work. Go back to your family. Be a participant in life, whatever that means in your world. But don't sit around moping about what happened on the exam. There is no benefit to that. Some people ask me, should I start studying right away after the exam? The answer is that the postmortem will help tell you that. If you see a consistent pattern in your work in which you did not complete the work and you had problems, then you ought to consider the possibility of restarting your studies. But if you basically were in the game the whole way through and you're just beating yourself up in that typical lawyer type A way that we are so good at doing, I would hold off. I'd wait, get a little perspective, little time lapse, and see how you're feeling in a few weeks. I hope that's helpful to you. We'll be back to you with more messages about exam peace, but also about what to do while you're waiting for your exam results to come out. And in the meantime, I hope that you have a good transition back to normal civilian, non-bar related life, and that you can begin to put this experience behind you and move on. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Well, that's our episode for this week. I hope it was helpful to you. If you're looking to postmortem your exams, make sure that you really do it in a way that's going to be productive and helpful. But for many of you, I think one of the most important things you can do is simply get on with your life, keep moving now. If you need to start studying for the next exam, please do that. And of course, if you're planning to take the exam in 2020 or beyond, I want to remind you about our brand new, all new free training webinar. It's called Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. It's available on the date and time of your choice, but you do need to register. And you can do that by going to www.accelerationbarreview.com/webinar. And then we'll see you to find out the 4 steps you need to take in order to pass and to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you have a great week. Enjoy whatever you're doing, and we'll see you next week along the Extra Mile.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.